The psychedelic drugs that most people know, psilocybin, LSD, MDMA, while efficacious, lack a lot of the drug-like characteristics necessary for them to be embraced by big pharma and doctors, prescribers. So what we've done is taken these compounds that were either discovered in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and applied modern day technology, drug discovery technology, to create superior compounds.
Hey there, Midas letter viewers and subscribers. Today my guest is Ian McDonald. He's the CEO of Minds Biosciences, trading on the CSE under the symbol DRUG. Ian, welcome.
Thank you so much. Drug, that's our ticker, and we have that same ticker for NASDAQ. Hard to forget.
Yeah, you bet. You know, I find it interesting. I talk to some of the psychedelic companies, and I say, well, how do you go about getting a company that's basically promoting drugs onto the exchanges? And most of them say, well, we don't consider this a drug; it's a therapeutic compound, and blah 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 blah. And I just go, well, okay, that's certainly one thing. But all right, so what is the business model of Bright Minds?
We are a biotech company, so we're really focused on creating the next generation of psychedelic and other serotonergic drugs. So the serotonergic or the psychedelic drugs that most people know, psilocybin, LSD, MDMA, while efficacious, lack a lot of the drug-like characteristics necessary for them to be embraced by big pharma and doctors, prescribers. So what we've done is taken these compounds that were either discovered in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and applied modern day technology, drug discovery technology, to create superior compounds. So we have a team of chemists and biologists who modify the chemical structure to accentuate the therapeutic aspects and tune out the negative side effects.
Right. Right. It seems to me that there's quite a lot of appetite for therapeutics companies from investors. What's the patient audience look like globally for Bright Minds?
Well, the patient audience is huge. Our drugs have application in a number of markets. The biggest market would be your traditional neuropsychiatry indications, and those are diseases such as depression. Depression, you're looking at a population of roughly 17 million people, and all of these numbers are in the United States alone. Certainly, these diseases are worldwide afflictions and not just U.S. problems. But in the United States, you're looking at roughly 17 million people who have depression, and those drugs today are treated with SSRIs, which are serotonin reuptake inhibitors. And those drugs are all 30 years old. They were discovered and commercialized in the 80s and early 90s. Those drugs are all off patent. So it's only about $400 per patient per year for you to take one of those medications. That isn't of huge interest to the pharmaceutical companies. In order for a pharmaceutical company to really make money off a compound, it needs to be on patent, and none of those compounds are. So if you took that 17 million patient market and multiplied that by the generic price, you'd end up with roughly $16 billion market. That's for a generic drug. But if you were to take a on-patent drug, the average price for that would be roughly $20,000 per patient per year. You'd get somewhere in the order of, call it, $400 to $600 billion in terms of a total market. PTSD, also a huge market. You're probably looking at $250 million. And then our drugs also have application in epilepsy. So your viewers are probably familiar with a company called GW Pharma, which was the pharmaceutical darling in cannabis. They went after a form of an infantile form of epilepsy called Dravet syndrome. And Dravet syndrome is a terrible condition that can be fixed by CBD, cannabidiol. It can also be fixed by some of the compounds that we're creating. So what we're creating are a safer version of compounds like fenfluramine, which is on the market, and that market is smaller. It's a orphan drug, which gives you a lot of benefits as a company in terms of financial incentive and market protection. And that market is again over $1 billion. All of the markets that we are going after are $1 billion per year markets in the United States alone.
Wow, interesting. So that's cool. So you're basically isolating the active ingredients in psychedelic compounds as opposed to applying the psychedelic compounds in their natural form. That's the basic differentiator.
Yeah, so we're going one step further. We are isolate the compound, take that compound, and make that compound better. So we have a team of chemists that are adding a constituent on here, taking a constituent off there, adding a methyl group on here, blah 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 blah. Anyway, the point is we're taking that compound that nature's provided, using that as a base and improving upon it to give the patient a better experience and to make a drug that's safer and more effective, and that can really be used to treat a broad patient population and not just patients who don't have pre-existing heart conditions or.
Right. So for clarity's sake, you're not synthesizing the compounds. You're isolating them or basically purifying them. They're still the natural compounds.
No, they're not. We are creating completely novel compounds. So all of our compounds are synthetics, and these compounds are improved versions of the natural product.
Wow. Okay. So as a longtime biotech investor of occasional success, I would say that kind of an approach kind of makes me hope that you have a major pharmaceutical sort of partnership or investor at some point in the timeline.
Yeah, so we've been receiving a lot of inbound interest from big pharma on all of our programs, and as a biotech company, it's, as you probably know, a quite risky endeavor. I think we've mitigated that through a couple of areas. One, we're not just a one-trick pony. We have an entire pipeline of serotonergic compounds. We have our 5-HT2C drug, our 5-HT2A drug, and a couple other programs. And that gives you more shots on goal. And the question as a biotech CEO or member of management is, how far do you want to de-risk that compound? Do you want to take it all the way to market? Do you want to take it through to phase 1? Do you want to take it through to phase 2? Every step you go, you are increasing the value of the asset. And every step you go, the price tag gets considerably larger. So you'd be looking at, call it $5 million for a phase 1 program, call it $20 million for $10 to $20 million for a phase 2 program. And then the bulk of the costs are really in the phase 3 program, which could be 50 to over $100 million. And typically what you want to do, if you are if you plan on partnering the drug, is discover it, obviously, de-risk it through preclinical studies, early clinical studies, meaning phase 1 in healthy volunteers, and phase 2, at least with a proof of concept study in diseased patients, to say, hey, this drug works, here's the data, we know it's safe, we know it treats this population, and we just need to prove that with a larger patient population. And that's generally where you get the most bang for your buck in terms of doing a deal with a big pharma company. So while we have considerable interest right now, we're constantly evaluating what the risk benefit would be to going at it our own and further de-risking it, or doing a deal with big pharma. And I think that's something that's unique about our company. Big pharma is really sitting there on the sidelines, looking at this space and saying, okay, which science is promising? Which compounds do we like? Which teams can we back? And what Minds has that I don't think maybe one or two other companies might have is experience in this field. So we're staffed with the best in breed of scientists and a team with big pharma pedigree that's done this before. One of our co-founders, Gideon Shapiro, just did this exact same thing at a company, at his previous company, which is called Rugen Therapeutics. And what they were doing was developing second generation versions of ketamine. These are safer drugs. These are drugs that are better tolerated by patients. And there, it was a Fidelity Biosciences company, and they had a number of successes. And that success was recognized by a couple of big pharma players, one of them being Allergan, another one being Otsuka, and this is all in the public domain, who came to them and said, "We love your science. We'd love to do a deal with you." And I think that's really what separates us from a lot of the other players. We know what to do. We've done it before. And yeah, it's really about executing, and that's what team's built to do.
Sure. So then what does the timeline look like for, getting to a state of monetization for the company, like in terms of having revenue? Is that quite a number of years away at this point?
I mean, it depends. If you take the drug all the way through, it would be a few years away. But like I was saying a moment ago, we have considerable interest from big pharma. And typically how a big pharma deal is structured, you would have an upfront payment, milestone payments. So going into phase 2, getting a positive readout in phase 2, going to phase 3, et cetera. Those would all be milestone payments. And then on the back end, you'd receive a royalty on all future drug sales. So we have interest today to potentially be to do a deal and be a revenue generating company and cash flow positive. If you partner out your programs, you are generally not required to take on the development costs. The development costs are borne by the pharmaceutical company who partners in. So that cash flow positive scenario could be as soon as this year, or we could further de-risk it and keep a bigger piece of the pie.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Well, Ian, I appreciate the time today. That's a different business model than all the other psychedelics I've talked to for the most part. So I'm going to follow along and have you back in due course with development. So thanks very much for your time today.
Thank you so much, James.
You bet. We'll see you soon.